Have you ever purchased lotion with a push pump? And it's like one of those bottles like these, and the viscosity of the lotion refuses to be transported by the push pump. It's like the lotion is too thick and the tube is too small. And that makes me think of this place that I used to get milkshakes where they would make the milkshake like extra thick, which I love, but then they would give me this cheap, tiny straw that had a diameter like smaller than a normal straw. So what's really happening here is that the push pump is going to take a little bit longer than expected to refill. You can push it a second time at any point in that refill, but you're not going to get another full pump of lotion. The extent to which you allow that push pump to refill determines the volume that you're going to get out of the next pump. Think about that for a moment, right? Because it applies for lungs when we get to the respiratory system. The extent to which you allow the push pump to fill affects the volume of the next pump. This is what is called preload. Preload is the degree to which the heart can stretch in diastole. So it really determines the filling of the heart. Since this is diastole, we have to think of something called the end diastolic volume. Preload and the EDV increase together until a point, right? Like it doesn't increase infinitely. Preload is basically how much the heart is willing to fill. More is not necessarily better. There's a perfect ratio of preload to tension. How much movie popcorn can you put into your mouth until there's so much that you can't even chew or swallow? There is an optimal amount of popcorn and there is an optimal amount of preload. Can I digress for a moment? I'm sorry. I swear it'll just be a minute. There's this principle called the Frank-Starling principle, and I'm sure when they discovered it, it was like it changed the world and was groundbreaking. But can I just summarize the Frank-Starling principle for you? Okay, here goes. The heart pumps out blood that it receives. Boom! Genius. Who would have thought about that? That the heart pumps out blood it receives. But what they're what they were really saying, right, wasn't too bad. It became really important to consider things like that during exercise. Like if you return more blood to the heart, then you're going to have to pump more blood away. The heart can pump faster, but we should be at this point in this class where we're calling that an increased heart rate. The heart can also pump harder. When someone says that, it's really hard to know what they mean by that, but they're probably referring to this concept, contractility. Have you ever worked out with someone who was in way better shape than you? And let's say that you go jogging with that person, and like 5 minutes into the jog, they turn and look at you, and they start making small talk, and you can't answer because you feel as if you're gonna die. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You can't answer because your heart rate is really, really fast. You have a very fast heart rate because your heart and you are out of shape. Sorry, I'm not. It's theoretical. So your heart, adjusting the heart rate is all that your heart can do to increase the cardiac output. Your friend, though, they're so in shape that their heart doesn't have to increase the rate of contraction. Their heart can adjust the force of contraction. Their heart can do this because they have trained it to do so. Yours is not trained. Either way here, whether you adjust the rate of heart contraction or the force of the heart contraction, you're increasing how much blood leaves the heart in 1 minute. You're increasing the cardiac output. Okay, so your EKG would have QRS waves that get closer together, right? Because you're having a fast heart rate and you end up having more QRS waves in 1 minute than your friend because your heart rate has increased. Your friend does not have an increased heart rate, but they will have an increased height or amplitude of their QRS waves. Their QRS waves, well, yours and theirs, anybody's, it's a reflection of the stroke volume. So this is how your friend is meeting an increased cardiac output for exercise. They're doing it by pumping more blood with each contraction. Again, their heart can do that because they have trained it to do that. I guess working out pays? I don't know. I forget about that in my life. Okay, so in thinking about how contractility might be increased, we also have to think about how much blood might be left in the heart. And that's a volume that's called your ESV, or the end systolic volume. Students often get preload and afterload mixed up. Preload is about blood coming into the heart in diastole. Afterload is about blood leaving the ventricles in ventricular ejection or systole. So remember the isovolumetric contraction phase, where there's no shape change of the myocardium, but it's building tension for systole. How much tension does it have to build? Well, it has to build enough tension to pop open those semilunar valves. Those valves are closed and they're preventing blood from leaving. And on the other side of those valves is all of the blood in the systemic and pulmonary circuits that is in the aorta and pulmonary arteries. And that blood is like surging backward ever so slightly against these semilunar valves. So the pressure that blood is exerting on those valves is 120 millimeters of mercury. So if the heart can build enough tension to exert 121 millimeters of mercury, then those semilunar valves will pop open and blood from the ventricles will be ejected into the arteries. We know that the left and right ventricles must eject the same volume of blood. Their stroke volumes have to be equal. But the left ventricle ejects blood with more pressure to fill up that huge systemic circuit. So when somebody with a VSD tries to generate that pressure during the isovolumetric contraction phase, all that happens is that the left ventricle just squirts blood into the right ventricle. This means that blood meant for the aorta, blood that would have been measured as part of the stroke volume of the left vent, it's not getting into the aorta. It's entering into the right vent. The stroke volume, and so therefore the cardiac output of the left ventricle, decreases. And you might automatically think, okay, so the right vent will just pick that up and clear that volume. No. The right ventricle's myocardium, it doesn't have the ability to generate the pressure that's required to eject that volume of blood. With every heartbeat, blood meant for the aorta is just spewing into the right ventricle. And this additional amount of blood in the right vent, it's now going to prevent blood that's in the right atrium from getting into the right ventricle. It's going to prevent blood that's in the vena cavas from getting into the right ventricle. And it's going to generate systemic congestion as blood backs up into the vena cava, then the veins, then the venules, and maybe even the capillaries. Over time, the right vent, it will add myocardium in an effort to generate the force required to clear the additional blood volume. But it's unlikely someone would get to that point without intervention. And that compensation, the right ventricle's additional myocardium, it's just going to shift the fluid overload to the pulmonary circuit.